Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm happy to present Leo Appleton, who will be giving the presentation today. Leo is the Director of Education for the School of Information, Journalism and Communication at the University of Sheffield in the UK, which is the number one in the world for library and information management studies, as well as overseeing the education portfolio of the school. Leo leads and teaches on the Librarianship and Library and Information Services Management MA programs, where he teaches a number of subjects, including all aspects of library leadership and management. Prior to taking up his academic role, Leo had a long career in academic libraries, including several senior leadership roles. He has a PhD in information science and has researched and published on many library management subjects, including performance measurement and quality assurance. He is the author of the book Libraries and Key Performance Indicators. Welcome, Leo. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Giovanna, and thank you, Talene, and thank you all, Carl, for inviting me to kind of work with you this afternoon and kind of share my understanding and experience of KPIs. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you with the Carl assessment group. So I'm going to share my slides in a minute, but I thought. Well, firstly, I just want to thank Giovanna for that introduction. I must have sent you some of that information, but hopefully you I've got some kind of credentials in terms of why I might be asked to come and run a session on key performance indicators. But I just want to say a little bit more about that because it's quite interesting. And again, it was great to be approached by Giovanna on behalf of your assessment group because I believe someone in your group had been part of a workshop that I delivered last summer at the International Library Performance Measurement Conference, or LibPMC as we call it. That was held in Liverpool in the UK last summer, and I did do a what we called a learning lab around key performance indicators. And I'm going to mainly today's session is going to be an online webinar version of that. But I have always been interested in quality assurance and performance measurements of libraries throughout my own library and information career, of which Giovanna has just said I'm kind of on the second stage of that, having moved into an academic role in 2020. So I've had this academic position for 5 or 6 years, where I now get to teach, the next generation of well, actually, I was going to say UK LIS professionals, but we're very international in Sheffield, so we do have we do have students from all over the world, and that's a privileged position to be in, and I can share my experiences of library leadership and management, which that experience is actually nearly 25 years working in largely academic libraries. In the UK, obviously, we have a big higher education sector, the university sector. We also have a tertiary education, the further education sector, which I've spent some time in, and I've also been a health librarian. So I'm pleased to have worked in 3 different sectors, but predominantly higher education in university libraries, and towards the kind of like 15 years ago, let's say, I kind of moved into those senior leadership director positions. But I've always been interested in how we measure our performance and demonstrate our impact, and we have to do that by assuring quality and then making sure that we achieve that quality and being able to demonstrate and tell the stories of how that quality impacts our library users, or what the value is of the services that we offer, what the value is of those services on our library users. And we can say that across any sector. It's not just higher education or universities. And I will speak later on about why we're in this kind of environment, the kind of almost neoliberal environment that we have to operate in on a global scale, which means there's even more focus, even more scrutiny on the quality of our services and how we report on the value and the impact of them. So just before I start my presentation, I just want to share with you kind of my own situation with regards to being on what I suppose a national assessment group. Like you are all part of this Carl assessment network. And in the UK, we have the Professional Association for Academic Libraries is known as SCONAL. I don't know whether you've heard of SCONAL. It used to stand for the Standing Committee of National and University Libraries. It's now just SCONAL. It doesn't actually stand for that now. But SCONAL had a series of strategic groups, and one of them was the PMQ group, the Performance Measurement and Quality Group, of which I got involved in probably about 20 years ago now. And that I had a subgroup which was the statistics group, and the statistics group was responsible for a kind of blanket Sconnell statistics approach across all the 150 or so universities in the UK. We used to return the same set of stats to Sconnell every year, and it was largely usage statistics, but there was also a lot of counting of chairs and desks and things like that. But also we would report loans, reservations, returns, downloads. Bear in mind, 20 years ago, downloads were fewer than print circulations. But anything that could be counted was counted, and everybody counted them. And there was about 120 statistics that you had to return on an annual basis. I was involved in that group, and I was involved in a piece of work where we shrank that number of statistics from about 120 to about 70. I wish we could have done more than that, but we only got it down to 70. I'm detached from that now. It may well have been reduced previously, but I did realise round about then that people would really beholden to these statistics, and everyone measured themselves against how bigger or better they were than their neighbour because of these statistics, which ultimately were usage statistics, but everyone kept referring to them as KPIs. And I thought, oh, are they really KPIs? I'm not sure what they're demonstrating. And KPI was a very vogue expression in the universities in which we worked because of the environment, the financial and political climate of UK higher education, and I do think that's the globe over. So we became more accountable, and KPI just became part of the jargon. So I kind of made it my mission, if you like, to unpack what do we really mean by KPIs, and hence the book that Giovanna's referred to already. I thought we need the library world needs a book about KPIs and what they actually do. So you're going to get a little bit of that from me over the next half hour. So I've obviously given you a little bit of background, and you know who I are. Hopefully, you're reassured by my credentials in this space. So we're going to do a session called Writing Effective Key Performance Indicators, and that's where I hope we'll get to by the end of the hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to cover a few things. We've done the welcoming introduction. I'm going to give you a bit more background and context about KPIs. Then I'm going to share some of our experiences here in the UK with some examples of indicators, and then I've got a series of activities want you to think about what your KPIs are, how do you set KPIs, and I'd like you to take away either some new KPIs that you might take back to your workplaces, or think about how you review and revise your current KPIs. So, in terms of background and context, what are KPIs? Now, I've already alluded to this, but this is almost a note. That next few slides are a note about the parlance of the language we use around KPIs. Ultimately, though, they are statistics or metrics, but they're within a context. So they have to be within a particular context. That's really important, and I think it's something that's quite often missed. A KPI, a key performance indicator, should help you see at a glance how you're performing. And how you're performing is quite subjective, and it needs to be how you're performing against a standard or against a target. Again, something I think is often omitted when we talk about measurement and performance indicators. KPIs themselves aren't actually service standards, which again, I think some people think we've got this KPI. It's a KPI against a target, and that target is the standard that we've set ourselves. And similarly, statistics by themselves aren't KPIs, but you can't have KPIs without statistics. So I'm going to kind of share with you now what I think are useful statistics and metrics that aren't KPIs, but are often referred to as KPIs. So on the left-hand column down here, I've got things that I would regard as a service area or an objective. So something that you may claim in terms of your services, your service standards. So, for example, to offer library inductions to new users. And that's great. We want to offer library inductions to all our new users. And we'll proclaim that and we'll live that value. But in order to know that you're doing that, you need to have a target. So let's say you might set yourself a target of 100%. All new library users will get an induction. I've been here on the right hand side. I've been a bit less ambitious than that. I've said let's have our target of 60% take up by new students. So that's a target that you want to set. That in itself isn't the KPI though. Another objective might be to provide tailored services for users with disabilities. So you might set yourself a standard here rather than a target to contact new users within 3 working days of receiving that disability declaration notification. Another example, to evaluate the effectiveness of information skills sessions or digital literacy sessions. So that's very popular. But libraries, I find academic libraries always want to try and demonstrate how effective they are in that skills agenda arena. So you might set yourself the target of achieving 80% satisfaction for all information skills sessions. Another objective, to provide skilled staff support to support quality library services. So in order to deliver that or measure yourself against that, you might conduct an annual audit of staff training needs and develop training plans accordingly. So you would set that as a standard. And finally, to engage with users to provide a responsive service. So again, your target standard there might be to hold 3 staff student liaison committees per annum. That for me is everything. That's very valued, and you're being very transparent about what you're going to do to achieve those objectives. But KPIs come in when we're trying to measure what we're doing against our standards or against our targets. So let me just move on. I'm going to talk now about usage statistics, because if I just go back, in order to demonstrate those targets and standards on the right-hand side, we need to be able to measure them, and quite often you need to measure it with some kind of usage. So we do get really focused on usage statistics in libraries, and why wouldn't you? Because we circulate stuff and we make digital things available to people. So you might measure the number of books in your collection. You can do that through the usage statistics of number of books issued, percentage of active stock, and you may set yourself standards and targets against having your collection used through targets around increasing or even decreasing issue figures from the previous year. You might set yourself a percentage of how much of your print stock you want in circulation at any one time. You may count the number of study spaces, and you might want to set up a usage statistic around the average occupancy of study spaces. And I'm saying you might want to do this. This is quite often the things that people do in academic libraries. And the target might be to always have study spaces available. So you may never want to be at 100% occupancy there, and that's where your key performance indicator would come in, because it tells you how you're doing against that target of always having study spaces available. I've put number of bins. That was actually something in the Sconnell statistics when I inherited them, when there was 120 of them. Number of bins with litter in them, that might be a usage statistic. And the target is not to have litter overflowing, so you would empty the bins twice a day. So you set yourself a target. Number of potential library users, the statistic might be average daily visits to the library, and you may have a target to annually increase annual visits. And I think footfall and library usage, you have footfall and you have kind of gate counts as well. You have occupancy of the library. They're usually highly sought after data for demonstrating the value and certainly the usage of the academic library. So none of those are performance indicators. So far, I've just looked at statistics, usage statistics with targets and standards that you set against service areas or objectives. But here's where you need to be able to speak to your performance indicators with regards to those statistics and those targets. Now, we've always jumped to just talk about key performance indicators, but key performance indicators it's just one element of a set of 4. And you don't ever really hear anybody talking about results indicators, key results indicators, performance indicators, well, maybe a little bit about performance indicators, and then key performance indicators. It's always about the key performance indicators. But as a measurement tool, it has to come as a set of 4. And I only found this out when I was dealing with the Sconnell statistics. I didn't know this. It was when I started to write that book that I started to look more into kind of management and leadership literature about quality assurance and performance measurement, and realized that the performance indicator commentators were grounding this in results indicators. So results indicators tell you what you have done. Effectively, it's the statistic that tells you how many books have been circulated, how many downloads have taken place, how many bins were full, how many times the bins were emptied, what was the other ones we had, how many, what percentage of time all your study spaces are occupied. So they're the results. It tells you what you have done. And the performance indicator needs to be that number, but in the context of what it's telling you to do. And that's where the target can come in. So if you've got a target of we don't want to be any more than 90% occupied in all our study spaces, because that means there's always study spaces available, then you would use that indicator. So say you do a measurement and you're at 89%, next day you're at 89%, or if you're measuring it on the hour, whatever it is, then you're hitting within the target. So as a performance indicator, it's telling you something. It's telling you to probably do nothing, but be wary that if your footfall increases, that target may well be at risk of not being met. So it's the fact that it's telling you to do something that more often than not will come as you might get monthly circulation statistics or monthly download statistics, but it's not the statistic by itself. It's the statistic in the context of the target or the standard that you've set against it, and more importantly, what it's telling you to do at a glance. So when we talk about key results indicators and key performance indicators, it's the same, it's just amplified, and that's why we put the word key in there. So a key results indicator shows you how you're doing or how you have done within a particular perspective against a critical success factor. And in terms of universities, that might be around student numbers, student recruitment, student attainment, student satisfaction. And then the KPI against that key results indicator tells you what you need to do to ideally increase the performance dramatically, because you're either under recruiting or your students aren't attaining or the majority of your students aren't satisfied. And as I say, they for me would be the key performance indicators for a university. And what I'll be inviting you to think about later is how you align your performance indicators and key performance indicators to your university strategy and outcomes, which your library strategy should already speak to anyway. So I'm just going to give you the UK example. Meanwhile, everyone's still talking about key performance indicators, even when they mean statistics, metrics, targets, or even results indicators. But there is one that everybody was using, because we have in the UK, we have something called the National Student Survey. So we've got this uniformity across the statistics that libraries are collecting, but every student in the UK also completes the same survey in their final undergraduate year, what we call the third year of an undergraduate degree. They all complete the National Student Survey. And the outcomes of that National Student Survey dictate where you are for our universities anyway, where you are in some of the rankings that people look to. So the Times ranking or the Guardian ranking. I'm not sure whether it feeds into the QS ranking. It might do a little bit. But there is one question out of 19 questions in that National Student Survey that asks students about their satisfaction with the provision of services of their university library. And that, for me, is potentially a key performance indicator if you've got a target against that. So if you're saying you need to, we want to achieve at least 90% satisfaction in that indicator, and then it comes in at 60 or 70, then you've really got to do something to affect how your service is perceived and delivered. And a lot of the universities in the UK use that one element of the National Student Survey as a key performance indicator, and that's very different to just collecting statistics to see how kind of smaller constituent parts of your library is performing. So after all of that, me talking about target standards, outcomes, results indicators, performance indicators, key performance indicators, usage statistics, you possibly are even more confused. And a kind of apologies, sorry but not sorry, because ultimately what I want to try and do here is the parlance will vary. What we've got to be clear about is what is it we really want to demonstrate, because very simply KPIs are a high-level snapshot of an organization based on specific predefined measures, and you have to predefine the measure as an organization, whether that's as an academic library or whether that's as the university as a whole. And usually libraries are dealing with PIs rather than KPIs, but we just call them KPIs. And they're PIs to check whether we're on course to achieve our intended outcomes and results around student satisfaction, around value for money, circulation of our stock, usage of our electronic resource, usage of our study spaces. And does it really matter what we call those metrics, usage figures, derived statistics, performance indicators, key performance indicators? And I would argue that after all of that, no, it doesn't really matter what we call them. But I think it's important to know, if we're dealing with statistics, that they are meaningful and they're telling us something and that we can act upon them. And if we can act upon them, then there is an element of performance indication there. So just some tips from me, who's done a few performance indicators. Have your performance indicators and key performance indicators linked to your strategy. Definitely your university library strategy, ideally your whole university strategy, so that you can really demonstrate the impact that you're having as a library service on delivering the strategic goals of the university. Always think about the outcomes of your services. Think locally, so think about what the outcomes are of your library service, but also think about how those outcomes impact on the outcomes of the university. Define the questions that you want your KPIs to answer, so they need to be meaningful. And I'm going to share with the big example I give here is when I spoke earlier about we work in that information and digital skills and literacies environment. And that's really important work for academic libraries. And that can also be media literacy, AI literacy, research literacy. But we want to be able to demonstrate the impact and the value that we have in that space. So the question that you want your KPI to answer is how either how valuable or how satisfied people are with those sessions, or how their effectiveness changes as a result of those sessions. And more often than not, I've seen people trying to demonstrate value and impact of their skills sessions simply by the number of people who have attended. And that doesn't tell you anything about the effectiveness of the session. It tells you about the number of people who have attended. So we really need to be asking questions about, kind of not necessarily as an exit survey, but later on asking people who've attended our skills sessions how it impacted upon them, what they can do differently because they've been to that session, how satisfied were they with the session, what did they think of the teaching ability of the library staff delivering that session. And it's only then can we start to tell a story about the impact of those sessions. So again, I think we quite often confuse usage and things like attendance and footfall as demonstrating value and impact. They absolutely don't. They just tell you where a student is at any one time. Also consider, and I think I've learned this by trying to be homogenous with the other 149 universities in the UK, that we're counting the same thing. But why are we? Because we don't really have the exact same strategy. We're certainly not in the same university that doesn't have the same university strategy. So no two libraries have the same strategy. Therefore, you don't need to have the same set of performance indicators. Ownership of performance indicators, and therefore key performance indicators, is all important. So your academic library will invariably be split into 3 or 4 divisions or units, one dealing with research support, one dealing with maybe teaching and learning, one on customer service. Make sure that those divisions own the KPIs that mean something to their areas of service, and that collectively you can have this service-wide set of KPIs. And never forget that the KPIs are there to help measure and improve performance. That's first and foremost. They're not there to demonstrate how many more books you've got than your neighbour, or how many more digital downloads, or how many more study spaces you've got from people in your kind of proximity, other university libraries, which is quite often what we end up measuring ourselves against. So things to avoid. Just that, measuring what other libraries measure, measuring things just because they're easy to collect or count. like circulation statistics. Also be wary of reporting averages and ratios and thinking that by themselves they are meaningful. You've got to have some meaning. So an average and a ratio is fine as long as it tells you to do something. And avoid not changing your performance indicators and key performance indicators. They're not static. They need to be up to date. They need to be dynamic. They need to be strategically aligned. And strategy will shift. Sometimes on an annual basis, therefore your performance indicators need to shift with them. So speaking of strategy, I've just shared that my original slide here that spoke to more than just the academic library sector, but I've put our sector here in that purple font. Think about your university strategy, think about your library strategy. And what are the big things in there? I've suggested information literacy, student attainment, academic success, research impact. They may well be strategic arms of your university strategy. As long as your library strategy speaks to them, then you've got an excuse and indeed a reason to be measuring the impact you have along those strategic lines. I'll just share with you there some other ones. If you were working in public libraries, you would have different strategic goals, potentially around social cohesion, community identity, economic regeneration, community well-being, literacy. Or it might be, if you're in a health library, better informed or evidence-based practice, clinical competency levels, digitally literate patients. So how do we get to be in this place where we need to measure everything? I would say it's the gradual commodification and commercialization of information for libraries and education for the university sector. And I think we can see that probably all over the world, certainly in the global north. And we might regard that as neoliberalism, or what I prefer to call it, new managerialism. Having said that, I've just cited all there, 1973. So a good long time ago, over 50 years ago, wrote a paper called Measuring the Goodness of Libraries. And that was, for me, probably the introduction of starting to quantitatively measure what libraries did, because they were really always regarded as being there for the greater good. Nothing goes wrong with the library. It's there to support, it's there to help. But unless you start to kind of be critical of the library, therefore ask what it does, then I think we were always in a danger of kind of falling foul of just being there for the sake of being there. So I think it's quite good to hold ourselves to account. I think it's good that we are held to account by our parent organisations. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to quickly go through the remaining slides are just examples from mainly UK universities of performance indicators that I've just found on the web. Now, whether they're performance indicators or not, if you're interested in this stuff, you can find examples there on other library websites. So let's just look at West London, University of West London. Saying they've got key performance indicators under themes. So you might say those themes are around, they may well be strategic arms or strategic goals. So embedding inclusivity to support success might be a theme that they can want to deliver, and they can have a KPI around unique items purchased over 5 years and have set themselves a target or number of inquiries received across different student demographics. A second theme there is understanding students' needs to help them succeed, using the National Student Survey library question, and to the target being consistently be in the top 10 within the UK, which is quite ambitious. Ebook usage per FTE they're saying is a performance indicator against that theme of understanding students' needs to help them succeed. Just share with a couple of other examples. The University of the Arts London, which happens to be one of my former places of employment. They've got strategic areas there on the left-hand side in the orange column. So space and place, people, and providing a valued service. There's a measure there. We will maintain access to our spaces as advertised, with a target of 100%, which means we're going to try and stay open 100% of the time. So as soon as they're not unable to do that, they're unable to meet their target. Is that a performance indicator? Well, it is if it returns you a number of statistics that you're going to act upon. So similarly, we'll provide access to a managed library service space, services and collections during teaching hours. We will ensure our spaces are people-centred by consulting and responding to users on our space and service provision. So these really start to fall, whilst they're labelled KPIs, fall out of some of that KPI discussion we've already been having. This one's from the University of Leeds. So they've set themselves targets to perform against, and I think these probably are more likely to be regarded as performance indicators. Physical spaces are visited by 50% of all registered university students each month. So they've set themselves a target, and they seem to be exceeding that target. Now, that needs to be set in a context the same as the next one. 95% of inquiries received via email will be responded to within 48 hours. To be able to demonstrate, effectively, it still just demonstrates that they're used and that they're quick at responding to inquiries. But all of those may feed into a key performance indicator around student satisfaction in general. So you've just got to think about what the things that you're measuring, what it's telling you to do, but more importantly, what can you do when those numbers fall below your targets? What is it that you will be able to do in order to try and pick those numbers back up or start to realize the targets that you've set yourself? This was a public libraries one. Again, for me, this is probably more counting than performance indication, but they're claiming to be key performance indicator measures for a new library service. And they are target related: increase the summer reading challenge sign up, increase the percentage of summer reading challenge, increase the percentage of visitors who access health related activity during their visit. But we're seeing these all out of context because we can't really tell what's being measured there in terms of a strategic aim or objective. I got these examples from a colleague in Australia. So again, they're everywhere, library key performance indicators. What do we have here? So at the top there, number of digital visits to the National Library, and they've got some targets because they want to have it doesn't really demonstrate value or impact. It just demonstrates that people are going, and they've got targets that they're not actually meeting. But if having people visit is an important aspect that they need to be able to demonstrate, then they need to be able to act upon that. So again, we don't know the context of the importance of having X number of people in that particular library space. And then we've got one from State of Victoria Public Libraries, talking about, so they've got quality measures, uptake measures, percentage of Victorian public library services with early years literacy services that meet the minimum standards described by the quality indicators, average number of hours of early years literacy programs delivered in Victorian public libraries each week. Again, it's still looking like numbers, statistics that demonstrate usage, volume, bigger, better, faster. You do need the context in order for those to be meaningful.